This is Digital Voices with Beau Tiffany. Inspiring and providing real insight to our listeners with every story. Exploring deep stories behind every guest. Please welcome your host, Beau Tiffany.
Welcome back to another episode of Digital Voices. For those of you that have followed me through this series, I hope that we have a good understanding of some of the issues that are going on in the Virgin Islands. I apologize if some of the material is a little bit dry and kind of reciting just history and facts, but the issue that I'm trying to raise is that the legacy of piracy still exists within the U.S. Virgin Islands. We have modern day pirates. They've taken control of large swaths of the U.S. Virgin Islands legal system. The people that are included in that large swath of innocent victims include victims from Epstein's island. The fact that Epstein bought his island in 1998, the first allegation of sexual abuse against a victim occurred in the Virgin Islands in 2001, and the fact that Denise George, the Attorney General for the Virgin Islands, had gotten a $105 million settlement and less than a month later announced that she was going after JP Morgan and Chase, and 4 days later was fired without cause from the U.S. Virgin Islands. That should raise alarm bells. Not only that, but when you take a look at the $105 million that was won in the settlement against Epstein's estate, it starts to take on a new light. It doesn't look the same as it does with this idea that the Virgin Islands had no idea of what was going on. As a tourist, I heard all about it when I was down there in 2016. So it's imperative to look at this in the light of the large amount of victims that are left without recourse and these people that are able to operate with impunity within the U.S. Virgin Islands legal system. The conflicts of interest, the laws, or I should say lack of laws regarding timelines for how long cases can sit and stagnate, has allowed corrupt individuals to take advantage of the legal process and the loopholes for their own corrupt doings, and thus operate with impunity within the U.S. Virgin Islands. So one idea I'd like to squash is the idea that the U.S. Virgin Islands doesn't have the money to support adequate services within the U.S. Virgin Islands. I'll note again that there's 15 representatives in the U.S. Virgin Islands representing a population of just about 100,000 people. In addition, I found out that the average salary for these representatives is about $150,000 a year times 15. You know, there's quite a lot of money rolling around. So let's take a look at this GDP. You know, obviously the U.S. Virgin Islands is a small economy with a population of approximately 100,000 people, but the territory's GDP was $3.7 billion in 2019, and the per capita GDP was $39,500. The U.S. Virgin Islands economy is highly dependent on tourism and accounts for 80% of the territory's GDP. The remaining 20% of the U.S. Virgin Islands economy is made up of other sectors such as financial services, construction, and government. Tourism is the driving force in the U.S. Virgin Islands economy. The territory attracts millions of visitors every year, and tourism-related activities generate significant revenues for the U.S. Virgin Islands government and private businesses. The U.S. Virgin Islands tourism industry is divided into two segments: cruise tourism and stayover tourism. The majority of the territory's visitors come via cruise ships, which generate significant revenue for local businesses such as restaurants, souvenir shops, and tour operators. The U.S. Virgin Islands stayover tourism sector, on the other hand, include visitors who stay in the territory for an extended period. These visitors typically stay in hotels or rental properties, and their spending generates revenue for local businesses such as hotels, restaurants, and tour operators. Now, in 2017, obviously, the Virgin Islands was hit by two significant hurricanes. In fact, one was considered to be technically a class 6, but we didn't have a class 6 at that point. was so severe that it reached a new level of hurricane scales. We hadn't seen one like that before. And then you have the COVID-19 pandemic and obviously its impact on tourism. The pandemic led to a sharp decline in the number of visitors to the territory, and this resulted in a significant reduction in tourism-related revenues. According to the U.S. Virgin Islands Department of Tourism, the number of stayover visitors to the territory decreased by 86.3% in 2020 compared to the previous year. Cruise tourism was also significantly impacted, with the number of cruise ship calls to the territory decreasing by 73.8% in 2020 compared to the previous year. The decline in tourism-related revenues had a ripple effect on the rest of the U.S. Virgin Islands economy. The loss of tourism-related jobs resulted in a significant increase in unemployment, and the reduction in revenues led to a decrease in government revenues. The U.S. Virgin Islands government was forced to reduce its expenditures, and this has had a negative impact on the territory's overall economy. The U.S. Virgin Islands has implemented several measures to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on the territory's economy. These measures include a temporary reduction in hotel occupancy taxes, a loan program for small businesses, and suspension of certain fees and taxes. The U.S. Virgin Islands government has also received significant funding from the U.S. federal government as part of the coronavirus aid, relief, and economic security, or otherwise known as CARES Act. This funding has been used to support the territory's healthcare system, provide assistance to small businesses, and provide direct aid to residents who have been impacted by the pandemic. As I mentioned earlier, tourism is the driving force of the U.S. Virgin Islands economy. The territory's tourism industry has evolved over the years, with the majority of visitors now arriving via cruise ships. However, the stayover tourism sector remains an important contributor to the U.S. Virgin Islands economy. The U.S. Virgin Islands government and private businesses have made significant investments in the tourism sector, including the development of new hotels and resorts, the expansion of cruise ship facilities, and the improvement of transportation infrastructure. These investments have helped to increase the number of visitors to the territory and generate significant revenues for local businesses. The U.S. Virgin Islands government's also implemented several policies to support the tourism industry. For example, the government offers tax incentives to businesses that invest in the tourism sector, and it has developed marketing campaigns to promote the territory as a tourist destination. The U.S. Virgin Islands status as a U.S. territory also makes it attractive to U.S. citizens because they don't need a passport to travel to the territory. However, visitors should really think about traveling to the U.S. Virgin Islands territory, given the issues with corruption and lack of accountability in the legal system, and how if something does happen, it can take you decades, if not a lifetime, to find resolution. I think the only way to get change to happen is when things are felt. If you're uncomfortable or in pain, that's a big incentive to change your ways. And 80% of the Virgin Islands gross domestic product is in form of tourism. Now, you're bringing in about $4 billion roughly a year in tourism and other sectors, but you can't afford to hire enough judges to handle caseloads. You only employ a part-time Office of Disciplinary Counsel investigator to handle both current issues as well as the backlog of issues going back to 1996. 12 years on average for a criminal case to get to trial. Civil cases are going back to 2002. And it's a snake pit. You have these small little islands. You don't have laws enforcing time limits on judges or the Office of Disciplinary Counsel in terms of how long they can sit on a case, or a case can be set in limbo without actually ruling on motions. In one particular case, there's over 201 motions and not a single court hearing. That would never happen here in the United States. In another case, as we talked about in an earlier episode, with the Office of Disciplinary Counsel having ruled their findings against an attorney only to have the board penned the disciplinary actions against that attorney for, in some cases, decades, allowing that attorney to still operate and practice despite findings of misconduct already found with the investigator of the Office of Disciplinary Counsel. And this seems to be routine. These are loopholes that are commonly sought and used. I'll repeat what I said before about a confidential source who said it's about time that the truth is told, and there will be people and institutions who will be glad that it has been, because this is something that is not just affecting the people on the islands of the U.S. Virgin Islands. This could be tourists. It's also victims of Epstein, who, due to the lack of specific specialized courts, lump their sex trafficking cases into their civil court cases, which again stretch back to 2002. Office of Disciplinary Counsel cases going back to 1996. Now, one thing that's really important to note and remind everyone, if you've listened this far, the U.S. Virgin Islands is accountable to federal law as well as the Constitution of the United States. So how and why they're allowed to get away with this is beyond me. Other than that, there's corrupt individuals like Epstein and his associates, drug traffickers. I have no political gain one way or another. I'm not influenced by any particular party. They're both full of shit these days, in my opinion. But I do find it interesting that Biden likes to vacation in the Virgin Islands. I find it interesting that he's been there throughout these years. I find it interesting that when you look at the flight logs for Epstein, you find Bill Clinton, not just a handful of times, but numerous times, Bill Gates, other high profile individuals. This island was served for one thing and one thing only. The way it was structured, the way that it was laid out, the girls always accompanied the elites. It's unfortunate that we'll never see the videotape collection that Epstein had built as blackmail against the people that ultimately, in my opinion, killed him. Did he deserve to die? Damn right, he deserved to die. Some would say yes, that he got his just desserts. But at the same time, when you look at the forensic findings from renowned coroner who said that you couldn't break that bone in the neck by doing that yourself, and it could only be done by strangulation, that's a powerful thing. When you take a look at the sleeping guards who were supposedly sleeping at the same time, maybe they're drugged. The fact that the cameras didn't work on such a high profile individual, too many things, all these factors together. I don't believe in coincidence. And when you start adding up all these pieces, all these puzzle pieces, you start to see that the Virgin Islands had already been a playground of corruption. And it was because of this that Epstein set up shop in the Virgin Islands. It was because of this that he was able to get away with sex trafficking for so long. The fact that the island knew about it, the locals knew about it, the government knew about it. High-ranking officials in the government, according to Denise George, knew about it. But they still got $105 million of Epstein's estate. They're still preventing justice to the victims. What's that say? Think about it.
This has been Digital Voices with Beau Tiffany. exploring deep stories from real-life guests with real-life experiences, providing insight to our listeners with every story. Stay up to date on future podcasts by bookmarking Digital Voices with BeauTiffany.podbean.com and follow Beau on social media by searching Digital Voices with Beau Tiffany. Have an idea for a future story? Send your idea to acrmadison@gmail.com. Until next time, grab life by the horns and keep inspiring others.